Hi, this is Kimberly from 101 Domain Corporate Brand Services, and we're here for a short tech talk for non-technical professionals. And so if you are joining us for the first time for one of our webinars, welcome. And we're going to be presenting to you some information about technical terms. And there's me on the left, Kimberly Darwin, and then I have Cory Sorrentino here from the Domain Services Specialist team. Are you there with us, Cory? I know he's here. We're going to hear him soon. Okay, so we're going to go on. And this presentation was created for people who have to deal with domain names but don't necessarily know all the technical terms. That would be intellectual property professionals. A lot of lawyers have actually asked me to create this webinar, and so this is for you, as well as non-IT related domain managers, like sometimes the marketing department or the brand management department will be put in charge of domains, as well as portfolio trustees who may be assisting as a third party in between domain management or when a domain is leased or sold over a period of time, as well as law clerks and paralegals who are required to make changes on domains on behalf of their clients. Okay, so why would anyone want to learn these technical terms? Why can't you just Google it? Well, you can. The main reason is to improve the client communication. So when your client asks you to change the name servers, for instance, they're asking you to make their site live or take it down, and it would be pretty important to know which one of those that is. And since the domain is often in your account without your client having access to that, you would be responsible for either taking down or putting up their website. So you can imagine how important that is. And knowing just the basic tech terms will help you eliminate any downtime, because most sites can be moved over with little or no downtime. So learning about that will help you in the long run. So the domain name anatomy, I really broke this down to easy digestible parts. And if you see at the beginning where you normally see the HTTP or the HTTPS, this is called the protocol. It's probably more technical than we need to talk about here, but one thing to recognize is if you see that HTTPS, that S part stands for secure. And so whenever you are typing in a name and you see that HTTPS, you're going to a secure site. And if you don't see that, then you may want to put up a little red flag in the back of your mind to ask yourself why, or make sure that you're not entering any secure information because they're not encrypted. The next one over on the right is the subdomain. The most popular subdomain is www. And I'm sure that you have probably typed in the address bar with or without the www. And if the domain is set up properly, both of them will get you there, the www or without. However, there are times when the DNS is set up differently and you could get an error. So the subdomain we're going to talk about on a later slide, some other examples of what you might see there. And then you have the term, which would be your brand name, my company, whatever that would be, then followed by the top level domain, the .com, the .net, etc. So we're going to talk a little bit about this one over here, this last part after the dot.
Hey, so everybody. Sorry about that, Kimberly.
Hey, you got it? Hi, Cory.
Yeah, I'm in.
Okay. So domain name extensions are divided up. We'll just divide them into the two here. You have the top level domain, which you'll sometimes see as TLD, and that is the term behind the farthest dot to the right. So the .com, the .net, If it's a country code like New Zealand.nz, it will be the meatiest part of the domain, and that will give you information as to whether it is a generic or a country code based on what is immediately furthest right to the dot. Sometimes registries will also create second-level domains. And if you can see in the examples, we've got domain.co.nz, net.br, com.au, and that would be the term between the dots. They all generally work the same, although some may have different requirements than others. For instance, the net.br does require that you be an internet service provider in Brazil. So you will sometimes come across your clients ordering these, and for instance, the .com.au, that's the only one that's available right now. So just knowing the difference between a second-level domain and a top-level domain is a good thing to know. Now, subdomains, if you can look over on the right, you'll see there's a tree with branches, and that's a really good metaphor for what these are for. So you can own a domain and then create unlimited subdomains. For instance, one you've probably seen often is the shop.domain.com or email.domain.net, webmail, and then again that www. So once the domain name is owned, you can consider that to be the trunk, and then all of the different branches are subdomains, which would map your user to a different part of your website. For instance, the shopping cart or the email service. Okay. Now we'll talk briefly about DNS, and DNS stands for Domain Name System. That would be name servers, A records, MX records, and text records, to name a few. So the name servers will be probably your most commonly requested change. And those are actual servers that hold the files for a website. So it's basically the address that sends the visitor to the server that's holding those files. And I've got 4 examples here of some popular ones. They're always in multiples, minimum of 2, sometimes 3 and 4, depending on how redundant that service is for you. Our servers are 101domain.com, and that means that if this one goes down, then this one is still up, and this one is still up, and that's what redundancy is. It will be able to go to another server should something be wrong with one of the name servers. Also, if you might be asked to hook up with Wix, there's an example of a Wix name servers. These are Amazon name servers with the AWS. They'll always give you at least 4, sometimes 6. And Cloudflare, if you're using Cloudflare system where they are DDoS mitigation, they're working to make sure that your site stays up no matter what. Cloudflare uses names. Abby and Jake, all sorts of different cool names. So expect that any of those formats are for a name server, and you will be able to enter those into the 101 domain account. Now we'll also talk about A records. The difference between the name servers and the A records is that the name servers, when you're putting in these, let me go back one slide, when you're putting these in, now 101 domain, or wherever your domain is being held, is no longer responsible for the DNS. We're sending it somewhere else. So if we put in Amazon name servers, then all of that DNS, all of the control of that domain name goes over to Amazon, and things would have to be changed over there. Okay, now if you're changing regular DNS from within 101 domains system, you would go to your domain name in the account and click on the DNS records, and you would see something like this. You've got all sorts of different A records here and some other ones that we're going to talk about later, and you'll see that these are pointing towards an IP address. Okay, so that means we're still using 101 domains DNS, but we're pointing somewhere else. Now the main A records that you'll see are, for instance, this domain is awake.africa and then www.awake.africa. So what I'm doing here is I'm pointing to this URL, and that could be anywhere. That could be with Wix or Weebly or something like that, where they're just giving you an A record and you're going to type in that IP address. Just as a side note, this is called an IPv4 address, and that just means that it's a 32-bit number. You'll see 4 sets of 3 numbers. That's how you know it's an IPv4. You'll probably never need to know that, but if it comes up in Jeopardy, then you can get that answer right. So all of these changes can be made from within your 101 domain account. Your client will most likely give you this IP address and ask you to point the A record to this. So you're going to type in this part. Okay? Next, we have MX records, and MX records are extremely important when you or your client want to use email. Email is associated with just about every domain, especially for business, and so if we are handling your DNS, your client may give you some MX settings, and this is what they would look like. You would see that the type is MX, and the time to land, you don't have to worry too much about that. That's just how long your cache is held. That can be left at default. And then a priority, which means that the first time we're going to try for email, we're going to go to this one. Well, my mouse got lost here. You might have priority of 0, 10, 20, 30. You might be receiving 3 or 4 lines of these to enter in for your client, and all of those would go in. So this is an example of a priority 10. Now, do you have to know what all this is? No. Your clients are probably going to give you this information, and you're literally going to copy and paste it in. And we make that relatively easy, allowing you, telling you this is the priority field, and this is where you paste in all that gobbledygook. And so you're going to put in as many lines as they give you, and that will set up the MX records for email. Okay, adding a CNAME. So a canonical name or a CNAME maps a domain to another URL. Now, if you see up in the A records, we were pointing towards an IP, but down here for CNAME, we're pointing to another URL. It's got a lot of stuff in front of it, but it's still a URL. Okay, so the CNAME will also probably be provided to you by your client in that similar format. It's going to give you mail, right? CNAME, and then the gobbledygook that you'll be posting inside the account. So webmail, there's another one, excuse me, webmail, that's an A record, I apologize, but you could, on occasion, be given the webmail part with the URL. So those may mix and match here and there. If they ask you to put in an A record, that's what you would put in. If they ask you to put in a CNAME, then you would choose that. Text records are kind of all-encompassing. They're used for a bunch of different reasons, and I'm sure that probably all of you have seen them at one time. And they're used for domain ownership. If someone wants to prove that you own a domain, that would be maybe for setting up an SSL, or if you're setting up Google Apps, something like that. They'll give you all of this stuff down here to copy and paste in. They'll say create a text record and have it mapped to here, and you're just going to copy and paste that in. So when that service is looking for this information, they can verify that you have access to that domain. So you might be asked to put in text records, and another type of text record is called an SPF record, which will look very similar to this, but it will define who is allowed to send email from that domain. So those are pretty popular now with all the spoofing that's going on in phishing. This record will be given to you to define who is allowed to send, meaning that I can't just send an email that is from Kimberly at awake.africa if there are instructions in here as to who can send. So those would be a pretty popular entry for you. Okay, and domain forwarding, that's when you're pointing one domain to another, and this is the simplest of forwarding. This would be if I typed in Frisian.club in the address bar, automatically without the user doing anything, they get redirected to the FrisianConnection.com. So domain forwarding is an easy thing to set up in your account at 101 Domain. You would just click on the domain. You would choose 301 forwarding, which means that it's permanent until you change it. And when I type in Frisian.club, I'm going to end up at FrisianConnection.com. This is commonly used for typos or misspells when you own a bunch of country domains, but you want everybody to end up at your .com. This would be the easiest way for you to send those visitors, no matter where they ended up, where they started, to end up at your main site. Okay, so just a quick discussion with Cory about what happens when your client gives you a setting and you set it in and you click enter and then they say, my site's not working. What would you do when that happens in order to troubleshoot what's going on with the site? So we're going to let Cory talk to you briefly about that and find out what we would do.
Cool. Thank you, Kimberly. So yeah, a lot of the issues that we see with clients and them having issues with their domain name not pointing to their site, the first thing that we would check is that either the DNS servers they've been given or the DNS records that their host has asked them to configure for the domain are correct. As Kimberly was going over the different DNS records, things like A records or CNAME records, if even one digit or one letter is wrong, it's not going to resolve correctly. So it's imperative that all the settings that are given are correct. And if they're not, they would have to go back to their host and ask them to check it again, give them the correct settings, and then reconfigure the domain. And then typically that fixes the issue. The second issue we see a lot is it's not necessarily that anything is wrong with the domain or the host itself. It's that there's no SSL configured for the website. So when Kimberly was going over the domain anatomy, in the very beginning, there's HTTP. So HTTP is the protocol where requests are sent to the server and received back to the user. So if there's no S within the HTTPS or HTTP, that means that no SSL is configured. And browsers now are displaying an error page essentially saying that the site isn't safe, and it gives you the option to continue forward or to close the window. So it's really important to always have an SSL on the site itself, so that way users can access the site with no issues. For the fourth bullet, HTTP error codes. So if there's an issue on the server where the domain is hosted, typically it'll throw an error code like in the screenshot below. So it says, for example, HTTP error 500. You could Google these HTTP errors if you feel so inclined, but typically you would go back to your hosting provider and just explain the issue that's happening, and then they would go through and troubleshoot it and fix it, and then come back to you and let you know everything's fine. So most of these issues lie within the host itself. So if your client's having an issue with their website resolving, typically they're going to have to go back to their host and talk to them about it.
Okay. Cory, we had a question. How long does propagation take when someone makes a change to the DNS or the name servers?
So typically propagations will take anywhere from a few hours. They could take up to a full day, depending on the cache within the user's browser or the cache on the DNS system when these requests are being received. So if there is an issue with the DNS records or servers themselves on the domain, any fix that's implemented is going to take some time to propagate through so users can actually see the fixed site. So it's really essential that if a new site is set up, that all the DNS records or servers are double and triple checked, and then push it through.
Excellent. And I do want to say that also with propagation, if you are making changes to some of the domains that are country codes in your 101 domain account, there are times where those registries in some of those smaller regions are pretty slow, and we often are waiting for them. So on a very rare occasion, you could get up to 48 hours for a very small manual registry to update those name servers. We basically send them in as soon as we can, but there are sometimes, believe it or not, still in 2019, people who are literally working at desks and clicking manually all of these changes. So if there is ever a time where propagation is gone past 24 hours, feel free to make sure to check with us so that we can do a little bit of research on our side and make sure that everything has been submitted properly, and perhaps we're just waiting on the registry itself. Okay.
Yep.
So we're going to move on briefly to domain security. And the domain security is important when you're in charge of someone else's domains. We really want to make sure that these domains are considered assets and that they're protected as such. So we're going to briefly go over enabling and disabling transfer locks, two-factor authentication, as well as notifications. Now the transfer lock is basically it's like a padlock for your domain from within your 101 domain account. Every domain is locked by default, and in order to transfer the name out of the account, it would need to be unlocked. Now, why would you transfer a name out of your account? Maybe your client is consolidating domains to another account, whether that be at 101 or another registrar. Perhaps you'll actually be helping one of your clients transfer names to us, and they may give you the username and password at other registrars, in which case you will also be required to disable the lock. Now, it may not look the same as it does with us, but generally across registrars, they all have similar terminology, transfer lock, you know, what else do they call them? EPP locks, things like that, where that you have to disable it in order to obtain the authorization code to move the domain. So here's an example of what it would look like in the 101 domain account for Frisian.club. Right now the lock is enabled. If I wanted to disable it, I would click on the box and choose disable, and then I would have to answer a secret question, and we collect 3 secret questions, and in order to unlock it, I have to know that answer. So this is also a deterrent for hijacking, because if someone does gain access into your account, then they cannot answer that question because you can't go to the secret questions area and determine those answers. So if you can't remember your secret answer, we would want you to call support so that we could collect documentation to help you with that. Okay. Also, two-factor authentication. Hopefully with every registrar that you're dealing with, not just us, you're using some sort of two-factor authentication. So beyond your username and password login, you're also going to have another code to put in, and in this case we use Google Authenticator, and once you log in for the first time, you could go to the security area of your account and add two-factor authentication, and the authenticator is available through all the typical app download places, iTunes, etc. What is it, the Apple Store, and you just download that, you'll scan that little barcode, and every time you want to log in, you're going to pull a 6-digit code from that authenticator, and it's going to be that as a field that pops up to allow you to type that in. So username, password, and then a 6-digit code that's generated for you right then and there from the application that's on your phone. So definitely add that extra layer of security for any accounts that you have. That's going to deter any kind of access to your account that is unauthorized. Now, I want to talk briefly about ownership and notification. So when you own a domain in an account, there are 4 different types of contacts. The registrant contact is up here, and that is the legal owner of the domain. Okay, the registrant area. So you'll have a first and last name, and if you do have anything in the organization field, that is the legal owner of the domain. Okay, if the organizational field is empty and it's an individual, then the owner of the domain is this person here. Okay, so I did this for privacy, but you'll also have 3 other types of contacts. The administrator, which may be you if you're a law firm, that sort of thing. So you would have the legal owner of the domain up here, which might be your client, and then you as the admin contact. And then technical and billing generally will be similar. They'll probably be the same as admin by default. But if you did want to change them, if you had a webmaster, somebody who's only involved in the technical part of that, you could make that change as well. Okay, now the way I have this set up, this is a public registration. Okay, we're gonna show you what the difference looks like. So with the contacts in the Whois database, which is a public database which shows ownership of all domains, you have the option with many extensions to make your information private. So on the left-hand side here, here's a public one, and I've gotten rid of the organization, but the organization would be showing here, and the state. Now, with GDPR, a lot of registrars have decided to redact a lot of information, and that's great. Not all of them have, and some of these are going to in other registrars are going to actually show the street and the city and the phone number and the email. Okay, so this is public information. If you are handling domains for your client, you may want to check on these sometimes and take a look at what is actually showing publicly, because if their home cell phone number or their home address is listed in there and you're responsible for their names, you would want to check that and make corrections. Now here's an example of a private registration, and you'll see that under the registrant name it says private registrant. This does follow the rules for GDPR, and if it allows you to contact the domain registrant, the owner of the domain, through a randomized email. Okay, so anytime you can make your client's information private, I highly recommend it. It's going to cut down on spam a lot as well. But this is the difference between the public and the private. And most registrars will charge a slight charge for private registration. Ours is $5.99 a year, which is less than a cup of coffee here in LA. So to me, it's valuable for those names where I just don't want to be bothered. They can reach me if they have to, but I don't want to be bothered. Okay. And we do have a question, where to check if your client's information is private or public. That would be the Whois database. There are plenty of them. Most people will go to whois.com. That's WHOIS.com. You could type in the domain name there and the information will show up for you. It will also tell you when the domain was registered, when it expires, and last time it was updated, which is important if maybe you want to know the last time your client made a change to it, or if any of your changes took hold. Okay. And so in summary, we did go over some basic tech talk here about domain name anatomy, making DNS updates, troubleshooting your hosting, and then ways to stay secure. So are there any other questions that, let's go over to for Cory or Kimberly. Yes, I see. Is there a download of these terms and information we can access? Yes, we do have. Cory, do you see it? It's in the corner for...
Let me see.
It's a download of a white paper for Basic Tech Talk, which you can download, and we will also make this recording available to you.
Yeah, so under handouts within the GoToMeeting screen, you'll see it's a PDF. If you just click on that, it'll download, and then yeah, you'll have all the info there.
Okay. And is there a way to check up on my Nameservers performance? How about you, Cory?
There is, but it's not something usually that the user will do. Again, that would be something that your host would do or a third party. Not necessarily that it's really difficult. It's just a lot of new terms and different things that you would be learning along the way to actually test performance. But it is possible. It's just most likely something you won't be doing.
Not probably for your clients. They would probably be doing that themselves,
Yeah.
is my guess. Yeah. Okay. Well, it looks like we've got all of our questions answered. So if you do have any further questions, please make sure you reach out to us. I'm Kimberly at 101domain.com, and we'll be happy to answer any further questions that you have. We will also make this recording available for you should you want to review it. And thank you so much for visiting us, and you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.